Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of She Plays Games. I'm your host, Lauren, and in today's episode, I'm talking with Lily and Violet Adams, also known as Nerd Pirates. Lily and Violet founded Nerd Pirates back in 2013 and helped their clients with all of their PR and marketing needs. They've worked on a load of creative projects, one of which was a companion book for the game Adventure Time Pirates of Enchiridion. It's also really awesome that they're twins and have been a team pretty much since birth. I first met Nerd Pirates at the Women in Games conference, which they were hosting, and I was so inspired by their charisma and talent. I really hope that you enjoy their story. This is episode 6 of She Plays Games. Hi guys, it's so great to have you both on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us. We're super excited.
It was it was just so great to see you guys at Women in Games and to get to talk to you. And it was just such a whirlwind experience, wasn't it?
It was insane. And also we didn't really feel we had much of a chance afterwards to catch up with everyone because we had to go very quickly after it finished. So it's so cool to hear all the feedback now and things like Twitter. It was incredible. I think the energy was amazing. The speakers were incredible. And just generally to have an audience of like badass ladies is always a complete joy. So,
oh my gosh, yeah. And they had some pretty kick-ass ones this time, like with Roberta Luca and stuff like that. Like it was so incredible to hear everybody's story and how they came to be. Quite a lot of archaeologists, I was finding.
Yeah, I know. We heard from people from archaeology, and then wasn't there somebody as well involved in construction? I believe,
yeah,
as well?
Claire.
G into gaming, all that kind of stuff. And also the fact that, obviously, we'll probably talk about this a lot later, but the fact that we are from kind of literature and the fact that it's always nice to hear from other people in the industry who are not coming through the quote unquote conventional route. It was very refreshing.
Yeah, really, really, really interesting. So you've hosted quite a few events like this. You had Women In at the London Games Festival, and then, of course, the 22% project. So how did you originally get involved with doing these events?
So this is, I guess, a more general thing because the specificity of it is never really as interesting as it sounds. It's very, emails are sent. But a lot of the time with that kind of stuff, it's a really basic networking connection type situation. So it's going to events, it's talking to people, them getting a sense of your energy. Because I think when it comes to moderation, so for Women In, actually, Tracy hosted the event, but we were moderating and doing an interview with Laura Taranto, who is very cool. She's from King. I think she's a lead producer at King. But how we actually end up being involved with them is mostly just through meeting people, chatting. I mean, we're like professional chatterboxes. We can't shut up at all. I mean, hence why we're doing this with you. I mean, we love talking. So I think people just generally sense a bit of your energy and think, hey, I want some of that sparkle at my event. I think that the funny thing about it is that I think pretty much every event we've ever been involved with has always been so organic a process to come. It was never, ever someone just sent me an email and said, would you like to be part of this? It was nearly always we'd be talking about something completely unrelated at some event, or maybe I'd meet up with them for coffee or something. And we'd just be chatting and they'd say, oh, wow, you guys like to talk. I think also as a duo, people, when they meet you as a duo, if you're a bit like us and you have quite a kind of fun duo dynamic, people suddenly think, oh, that reminds me of like presenters that I see on television because they have this kind of like, I mean, hopefully not Anton Dett or Jed Woody vibe. Please no Jed Wood. No.
There was no golden buzzer at Women in Games, No,
but I think people sense, okay, events sometimes require some people with a lot of high energy to kind of keep the ball rolling. So when they're talking to us, sometimes it just kind of clicks and they go, oh, hey. A few days later, after we've seen them and spoken to them, they sometimes get in touch and just say, hey, I really enjoyed chatting. Would you be interested in doing this? And invariably, because we're very greedy, we say, oh yes, I would. I can't wait. I love it, because we love getting involved in that kind of thing. Anything community driven and community led is really our jam. Also, the more you're seen, if that makes any sense. I think that's something, as freelancers especially, we kind of have to really push, because the more you're visible, the more visibility you get. It also snowballs. So yeah, it's that kind of process.
Yeah, definitely. Like that. Yeah. I mean, with you guys, yeah, you do have such a great dynamic, such a great rat-a-tat.
Thank you.
Yeah, it does make you feel really excited for what's to come. And yeah, I fed off of it. I ate it. I took the hashtag, felt it at Women in Games. So that was absolutely amazing. And with that in mind, though, since you've been to a lot of these events, do you feel like the conversations are going more towards improvement in the industry? Do you feel as though over the years things maybe have improved, or do you feel like they're kind of the same and we still need a lot of work? I mean, obviously we do still need a lot of work, but
I mean, I think it's a complex issue. I think as with every kind of complex question, it's always a mixture of yes and no. I think we have made strides. I think especially in terms of representation within actual games themselves. I think there are strides being made to making more female playable characters, and female playable characters with more depth, and actually room to be perhaps more flawed. But I think in terms of intersectionality, I feel like that's not really happening yet very much at all. And also I think it's very difficult to measure the impact that's having within the industry itself, in terms of professionals, in terms of how people relate to one another within workspaces. But I mean, I'm a positive person. I believe that we are moving in the right direction. And I think especially initiatives like Women in Games and events like the ones that we were just speaking about are making this issue at least more visible than I think it ever has been. So that's a great thing. I think women are having more of a voice in that conversation than has ever had. So that's great. I just think I would like to see more, data on this about how that's actually being reflected in the industry. But yeah, what do you think?
I definitely agree. I think it's definitely a combination of yes and no. And as you pointed out, Violet, I think there's a kind of two-pronged element to this, which is representation in games themselves and the media that we produce as an industry. And there's also the issue of how we behave in industry and how does the workplace operate? How does hiring operate? And I think it's very easy to say, okay, we're doing more successfully than we might have been before in one area, but perhaps that's not always reflected in other areas. So it's a really complicated issue that, in comparison to when I was a kid and I played video games, I do think that, wow, Ellie being one of the main characters in Last of Us 2, for instance, is something that when I was a really young girl would have transformed my understanding of that video games were for me as a person. And I think,
I remember playing, I think it might have been Fable 2, and I always used to try and play as a guy in it because of the models of the women in Fable 2, the more kind of strong you got, the way, I don't know exactly how they modeled it, but, I never felt like that was a really good reflection of like a good female character at all. It felt really one-sided, like the female character had just been like an add-on afterwards. So that's less happening, which makes me very happy. But yeah, we need more work in other areas. But I just have to say though that the actual networking events for women in the games industry are so awesome. They are. I feel like, especially because we do work in games, but we also work in the entertainment world a bit as well. I feel like there's not the same infrastructure in the entertainment world for like women in entertainment. I mean, maybe there is, and I've not been to those particular things, but I felt very welcomed into the games world as a woman by certain initiatives and certain networking events. So that was cool.
I feel like I don't know, I'd like a massive plug. I guess I want to do at this point for Women in Games actually, and for Women in, because I feel like it's fair to say that a lot of the major work that we have done across our career has been encouraged by, supported by women in the industry who we met through Women in Games initiatives, like just Women in Games more generally, or Women in, or the 22% Project. I think that those were opportunities for us to meet people, to network, but also to run ideas by people. We've mentioned her, I believe, already, but Tracy McGarrigan is a particularly great example. She's from Ansible PR. And I feel like she was an individual who very early, when we were entering the games industry, we were able to talk to and to run ideas by her and to say, hey, even something as small as saying, this is a client I'm working with, have you worked with them in the past? You know, do you have anything that you want us to know or be aware of, or things we should think about? And that was really helpful and really useful. And that hasn't stopped as we've developed in our career. It's not like when you enter the games industry, there's mentors everywhere and then they just disappear. I think the term people use is sideways networking, where your peers, you spend time networking not just with people who are you feel that are miles above you, but also people who are working in similar spaces you are, to say, hey, I'm a woman in the industry, you're a woman in the industry, let's chat.
Yeah.
Let's be friends.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I think that's the thing as well about these kind of initiatives, is the fact that like you hear about the experiences of how women are treated in certain companies versus others. Because it was really interesting hearing about Rockstar and how well the ladies there felt as though they were treated. They felt like they were really listened to and stuff. And it's sad to think that there's not a lot of companies, like there's a lot of companies for everyone that does do that. There's a lot that don't. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like the fact that those initiatives exist and women in those companies pointed out to their higher ups, they're starting to take notice that they can send their female members from their company to these events as well, as a show of like, we notice, we're taking care, and then we'll pay attention. Like, I think, it's incredible.
I think the resource also can sometimes be especially valuable to people who are freelancers like us.
Totally,
because when you're working with a company, sometimes we don't meet in person all that often with some of the clients. Sometimes it's very often. Other times it's more Skype meetings, or it's more email kind of chains and that kind of thing. And so for us to hear about women who've worked in that company sharing their stories, it gives us an insight and an access to their work culture that sometimes we wouldn't be able to hear about otherwise. Because, sometimes as a company, you haven't worked with them, you don't know what they're like. And as freelancers, I can't just wander into the office and be like, hey, how's this?
Yeah.
How do you treat your staff? Because we're in some senses outsiders from that company, coming in as freelancers. I mean, I'd like to think that we don't end the project as outsiders, but you have to kind of start that way. And being able to talk to women in the industry at these kinds of events and just say, hey, what are your thoughts on blah? From somebody who sometimes does homeworking or co-working, you might have a different perspective than we have and that we could ever have.
100%. I mean, even some of the girls were saying, like, we work at the same company, but we never actually met before in person. Like, okay. It's just because they're so far apart. But all right, so going back in time a bit, so what sort of games did you play growing up that sort of sparked your interest in the games industry in general?
I mean, God, so many. And Pokemon. If we don't mention Pokemon, I'm like, it's not even real. Like,
it's
Pokemon,
just a slight against the gaming gods.
Exactly. Yeah. It's basically gaming blasphemy.
At the risk of sounding like I'm delivering a TED talk, I just have to share really, really quickly that I think one of the first games you and I ever owned, we bought a secondhand shop. We came from quite a low income family. So a secondhand shop, we bought a £5, which was all the money I had in the world, one of the old fashioned black and white Nintendo,
it was amazing.
It was gorgeous. It was fat. It
had a contrast dial.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. It was so nice.
And then the first game, I think, I could be wrong. I think the first game we ever got, a kid at school, I think his name was Andrew, gave us a copy of Pokemon Red that could play in this. And that was a transformative time of our lives when we suddenly had access to this game. And we were, I remember playing constantly together, leaning together over this one little Game Boy, and then constantly having to adjust the contrast so that we could both see simultaneously. But that was Pokemon. Obviously
Pokemon
huge.
Well, I mean, this is not so much as kids, I guess, but just informative moments for us was like Portal 2. Oh my gosh, so cool. A Fable. I mean, despite what I said earlier, Fable was really huge for us.
It was like the first game where I felt like I could get married. What? I can do things.
Oh my God, making my own house. We were obsessed.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, all the customization stuff is always
paved the way. It really paved the way for those kind of games.
Yeah.
What
I'm
else?
trying to think. I think we played a lot of licensed games as kids, which I love. So we played, I think it was the Incredibles game,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. Those are the kind of ones I remember standing out as children. Although Dead or Alive was as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was always Tommy forever.
I was Christy. She was the only girl for me. Christy forever. She was so cool.
But no, I also think that maybe as kids, like the Pokemon example's a funny one because we had to lean over one thing. But I think anything that had like couch co-op that you could do with siblings was immediately an A-star. Like it didn't matter what it was. It was like, okay, we can compete with one another or against each other. This is heaven.
It could be like rock pet simulator, and you would still eat it up.
I think we had Tamagotchi, you know. Oh no, it was a G&T's knockoff of a Tamagotchi. But I remember thinking that was pretty nifty, and I'd never seen anything kind of quite like that.
Yeah.
And maybe that, I think, was one of the earliest times when I realized, well, somebody, I think because it was a G&T's one, I thought, well, who made this? I mean, who actually decided, okay, Tamagotchi's big, I'm going to make a version. I think that might have been one of the earliest times I had the conversation of like, someone actually had to make this game. Whereas for me, Pokemon descended from heaven. Like,
yeah,
I couldn't compute the idea that somebody had actually come up with a Pikachu. They just existed.
Yeah,
there wasn't that. I don't think that ever entered my mind.
100%, 100%. I mean, like, well, sharing must have been an interesting thing in your household as well.
Very
like,
much.
how did you decide who gets to hold the Game Boy and then who?
Well, this is such a random thing. This is so weird, but I think we were going to write actually a blog about this at some point. But we thought, I mean, what a random thing to write a blog about. But backseat gaming.
Yeah,
because I think it must be a phenomenon that so many siblings in particular have experienced, but nobody really talks about. And I know not so much obviously now, but I still find myself, because I grew up in such a sort of backseat gaming way. Like I remember even playing Assassin's Creed now, if like Lily's playing Assassin's Creed and I happen to walk in, I'll immediately, my eye goes to the map and I'm like, I'm watching out on the map so I can give you warnings if things pop up. And like we have little roles that I think were developed as just children that we still can't sort of break. Yeah, we always said if one person is playing first, this is hilarious. If one person got to play the first game, the other one got to read the manual. Oh yeah, which was in the days when everything had manuals. That meant that you were kind of queen of the manual, and you had access to all the additional information that the other person couldn't possibly know. But you could
just give away in opportune moments.
You could dispense your knowledge. Yeah. So as kids, that was the thing.
I'm not going to tell them how to jump yet. I'm just going to see if they figure it out.
Yeah. Exactly. And then you can say like, oh, that's an interesting strategy. Just throw little nuggets like that in there, things like that, just to watch them squirm. But no, even now, this is hilarious. But even now, I do think that there's a collab. We like to play quite collaboratively. So, for instance, we've got a Switch each, and we play Breath of the Wild a lot. But the amount of times where I'm like, we kind of like to do a little catch up, where I'm like, oh, where have you been and what have you been doing? And I think that we can see that a lot in like on social media and stuff like Discord and all this kind of stuff. I think people are quite hungry, even though gaming can be solitary depending on the title. A lot of people like us, I think, love sharing and being like,
oh my god, yeah.
What do your characters look like in this RPG? And, what did you think of boss decks and all that kind of stuff? And I think this is where the fact that we work in gaming and entertainment crosses over. But I'm also fascinated, and this isn't so much something how we play, but I'm fascinated by the emergence of a kind of like peak TV version of games, whereas like people get together and almost treat it like I'm watching Game of Thrones or I'm watching my friend play Last of Us. And especially people who aren't gamers, I mean, we're like consummate gamers, we game all the time, but I mean our older sister, for instance, didn't really play, and when we were playing Last of Us, it was like she was watching a TV show and she couldn't wait for next week's episode. And that's a development in games that I think will continue. I think that there'll be more sort of just general competitive, less communal things, but there'll also be an emergence of like season style games. And I don't know, I think there's like a cinematic version of games waiting to happen. Streaming is already huge, but streaming for the narrative, and for maybe non-games focused audiences. I can so imagine a cinema like the Odeon eventually, when a big title, Last of Us 3 or something, came out. You could imagine everybody kind of packing in and seeing a really good player do a big playthrough, and then maybe having the popcorn. It's like theatre. I think of it as like theatre, and I think it's I think the games will become more intersectional with other industries as we progress. And I'd like to see some more of that. I think that's fun.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was a huge debate recently, actually, about, I think it was Death Stranding. They've created a really, really easy mode of the game just so that people could play it and just watch. And I think they may be... This may be wrong, but I think they might be doing it for Final Fantasy VII as well, which obviously, like, Final Fantasy is so narrative focused, but like I keep trying to pitch it to moms in my area about video games, and they just have no, like, it. Bless them. I think it's because so many people are still stuck in the mindset that games are just Mario. You're just playing through levels and stuff.
Yeah.
Not knocking Mario. Mario is fun. But like, yeah, it's just beyond the scope of realization, the fact that like games have so many levels now, like in terms of just like things they cover, politics, religion, like there's so much more to games now than there ever was in the past. And you're exactly right. They are like episodes, they are episodic. And yeah, I'm excited for when they do cross. And I feel like Death Stranding is kind of like the first step towards that.
But I know, especially because they're casting like Norman Reedus and people who are already faces in like Hollywood. I think people who aren't already gamers are thinking, well, I've watched him in like Walking Dead. Maybe I could play him in Death Stranding. Like, I think people are seeing that, they're getting it. So I think that's actually also a marketing problem. To go back to what we do, that's a problem of marketing, which is that people, if they can't relate to what a game is, if they've never played before and they don't understand gaming, like grammar of the control, the rest of it, then they can't really relate to how they'd be involved in an experience. But if they see Norman Reedus, they're like, well, that's like a film. I could do that, you know. But
exactly.
I absolutely agree with what you say. It's A, marketing, but B, also in the development of the game itself, accessibility and kind of easy mode, which I feel gets everyone hates it. They're like, I don't want to play easy mode. And I'm like, what's wrong with easy mode?
You don't have to play it. You can play normal mode. Nobody's going to judge you.
It gets such a bad rep, but we're big fans of easy mode. And actually, I think it was, I don't know exactly what they called it, but obviously Assassin's Creed did the mode where you could just walk around, and it was narrated by a historian, I believe. It was just
I didn't know that.
And it was a non-violent edition of the game where you could just experience it as a more of a kind of exploratory simulator, I guess.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really successful. I remember speaking to some of my non-game friends and saying, okay, you're quite intimidated by the kind of trying to participate in some of the more complicated kind of violent aspects of the Assassin's Creed series. Would you be interested in this? And they all like, yeah, this would be great.
Yeah. I mean, I have a friend who's a teacher, actually, and she says that they covered art lessons in school or something, like where they've tried to identify paintings or something. And the kids have blurted out like what it is. And she's just like, whoa, where did you learn that? And they were like, Minecraft. And but so it is just amazing. Like, I think there is a future in it. And I think the more and more we sort of convince people who maybe aren't necessarily believers, the more ways that we can include them, the better, really, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you both went to Oxford University and both studied literature. Was the plan afterwards to always work together as entrepreneurs on creative projects, or did you consider going the more traditional route?
Well, this is funny. We were discussing this even the other day, that it's funny because we're planners, but this was not very much it was very organic. Like, we've always collaborated, and we're twins, and it's like very much the stereotype, but it's very true with us. We've completely collaborated our entire lives on projects, on creative things, and doing just like mad stuff together because it's fun.
Films, blogs.
But yeah, I mean, like when we straight came out of uni, I think we did, I can't remember when exactly it was, but we did we both competed and basically won 2 commissions in association with Channel 4, where we did 2 short films each. And that was kind of funny because actually we were both doing it, but on 2 separate films we weren't collaborating at all, which was kind of strange.
Yeah, I think that might have almost been a moment where we each had our own film, and I think our filming dates were within 1 week of one another, and we kind of turned to each other, and I had Violet on my set and she had me on her set, and we said, well, this is great, but it probably would have been convenient to have done a film together, a group film, because we were naturally collaborating anyway. But on paper, this was Lily's film and this was Violet's film. But to be honest, it was a collaborative process. So yeah, it was very organic. We came out, there was a discussion at some point about, okay, you know, are we going to go to an agency? Is this an option for us? Should we be freelance straight out of university? Is that totally nuts? But I think our temperament was that we realized quite quickly, like with these films, that we naturally enjoy collaborating. And on top of enjoying collaborating, it works for us. Because some people like it, but it doesn't actually produce a kind of a final piece they're both happy with. Whereas I think we have a kind of a process that seems to have panned out okay for us thus far. And so we just went from there.
But
really.
also for us, like freelance working together was also just like, I mean, maybe this is my own little soapbox here, but I feel like coming out of uni, I think there are lots of, not all companies, there are some companies that are just not willing to give young new grads responsibilities to do that I think they're capable of doing, which I understand. You know, people have to be tried and tested and people have to all that stuff. But at the same time, we felt that going freelance and working together was our way of getting into the industry in a way that meant that we could start on the projects we really felt passionate about and work with people who we really loved. Because I felt that sometimes joining a company, there's a tendency of being like, you must start at the absolute bottom rung and work your way up, which I completely understand. But we felt we had the experience to go in there and start doing projects, and freelance was the way to do that.
It's interesting that you say that as well, because managers as well can be quite damaging of that. Like so many times, like I've had managers where they've just not given me work because they just sort of feel like, well, my method is working. It's working for me. I don't want to give up the responsibility to you because then I have to spend the time teaching you, even if like I could maybe do it in a different way, but they just don't like giving that up. And especially not to somebody who's younger than them. Yeah. So it's a very fair point.
Yeah, I think also, especially on that point, it meant also we could work with collaborators and clients and people who maybe would be best suited to our style of work. It meant that we could say to them, hey, you know, this is how we like to do things. This is how you like to do things. You know, we haven't got a vested interest in doing it anyway. You can pitch to us. We're flexible. You tell us how you want it to be done. But on top of that, you know, if you want us to have contributions about how this could be run, we're willing to do that.
And we've just found, like, I think people were like sometimes shocked when we talk about it, but we found that like some people think, oh, you know, freelancers, are they treating you like? We've had such great, like, especially Virtual Umbrella, who we've been working with them. I think it's been 3 years.
Yeah, I think so.
So we went for 3 years, and like for us, that's like the dream collaboration, because we just treat each other like we're friends. We talk really openly. We have like creative ideas, like bounce ideas of one another, and it's like totally open. And that's just been a dream. Like, that's so much fun.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, they're a duo as well. I mean, obviously there's a broader Virtual Umbrella team, but the founders are a duo. And I think, you know, it's not that I wouldn't ever want to work with people who are not duos. So no, we're not saying that.
But
I must only work with twins.
I do think that that it can be sometimes very enjoyable to work with groups of people who enjoy the collaborative, creative process. But equally, people who once that collaboration's done, you know, obviously then you got to put your head down and get it complete. But I know I'm very much pro creative passion and meetings, enjoyment, discussion. I think that's really valuable, especially in PR and marketing, where I think you do need to have a strategic approach and a creative approach that can be improved by really thinking together.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that in mind, then, with the sort of brainstorming process, how do you guys generally approach a new project, a new venture?
I mean, they're all unique, so they all have their own needs. So sometimes we're working more closely with an in-house team, which requires us to obviously really get up to speed on what that team is like, how they like to work. But quite often, basically, we go in, we have a brief, we have a meeting, we talk with them about their needs, all the rest of it. We then go away and have some really intense meetings together. We really bash ideas about, and we properly go at it. And then a lot of it after that is a mixture of like meetings and collaborations with them, and then just remote independent work from us. So that's kind of the way we normally run things. But as we say, like, depending on the client and the project, some of it requires to be really on hand with them, and some of it they're more happy for us to say, we've got this, you guys relax, we'll go and get this done. So it kind of depends, but for us it always starts with that, like, at least 2 days of like we just like whack ideas around.
Yeah.
I think it's really valuable because I'm quite a structure now. Like, I really like, so when I work on a project, and I'm sure a lot of people are like this, but I like to have the whole thing kind of quite well structured so that there's, you know, we have clear deadlines, clear deliverables, everything's really clear and easy. And on top of that, you know, when we're working with deliverables, I like to have a kind of structure for the way things are laid out so that everyone's clear, everyone's calm. However, when it comes to the first week or so of a project, or sometimes it can be less if it's a short-term project, that's the time when we like to say to the client, if you're willing, let's try a really unstructured first couple of meetings, because I think people sometimes enjoy it when you can say any detail is okay. You know, if the first thing you come up with in a campaign is the very first thing that comes to your mind is a hashtag pun, that's fine. We can work out how that's going to fit in everything else as we go.
Or if it fits.
Yeah.
But sometimes the ideas that come to your mind day one sometimes make no sense in the structure and don't really have a place. And if you don't give time for them, then people, you know, haven't got a chance to have their say.
You can't squash stuff early.
Yeah,
you know, you
you
can't
just
squash
gotta
it.
be
You gotta
really-
let it grow a little bit first.
Encourage a tiny bit of madness and then rein it in into something really tight and considered.
Also, I think most of the time when you have like well, not all the time, but when you have a gut instinct when you first start a project, often enough we'll find through research later, we'll go, okay, we can see how now this actually fits into something very important research data-led strategy we're doing. But I think sometimes it does start with like I feel this could really work. And then we go, okay, does it work?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's no, and sometimes it's yes. But it's important to have that like moment where you get to like be mad,
especially with fandoms as well, because we've worked on quite a few licensed experiences. So that was the Adventure Time game and the Steven Universe KO game. More often than not, we're already a fan of the
big fans,
the product before we even start. But which means that you do have those kind of gut instinct moments when you first begin, like, oh, I'm a massive Adventure Time fan. I already have a feeling of the kind of stuff that I think would work. And then of course you want to supplement that with lots of research, but you know, that first instinct sometimes is the best. Sometimes it can be the one where you go, you say it and the whole room just kind of go, that feels right. That feels Adventure Timey. And then later on, you may have to adjust as more information comes in.
You almost sort of wish that you could have been a fly on the wall during the Sharknado brainstorming. What were their first ideas? What led them?
I like to think that it was like a very corporate meeting. Someone suddenly went, wait a minute, shark tornadoes. That's it. That's
instant. It would only happen in America, though.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Only in America.
It'd be like biscuit leak. It would be like a really toned down version. I think in America everything's bigger. It's like a tornado and a shark. Here it'd be like it's a goldfish in a pond.
Yeah, 100%.
A goldfish and a light breeze.
Yeah,
that would totally be it. Yeah,
it's like Magikarp.
Watch that.
Yeah,
goldfish light breeze.
I would
need
do
a better title, but other than that,
yeah, totally. So with that in mind, PR and marketing have obviously just like they're in your soul, you're in your blood. But you did go to university for English literature. There's definitely like a synergy between the two. There's stuff that overlaps. But how did you decide that this specifically was your path?
It's funny because we were thinking about this actually just the other day. Someone asked us, well, how did you become PR and marketers?
Also in games as well.
Yeah,
like that's not literature.
But I think our very first step we took post-university, we thought that we would be in the copywriting niche specifically. We knew that there was, people thought we're good writers, we've studied English literature, we have a hopefully strong grasp on the English language and communication, and also literature, the academic side of literature is about understanding how people communicate and how people read and how they interpret, which was really very, very relevant to copywriting. But we started to write a portfolio for ourselves sometime around when we first said, okay, maybe copywriting could be a possible route. And then we found that the services started to expand because we thought, well, okay, if I'm copywriting, someone needs to write me a really good brief for this copy so that it's the right thing for the brand. And then we started saying, well, actually, I think the strategy should actually be more this. And it started to expand. And we realized quite quickly that copy was just one part of the whole. And that same idea of literature being applicable to copywriting, because we understand communication, could actually be applied to the whole PR and marketing industry. Because the whole thing it's a piece of communication. It's saying this is what, maybe this is the game I'm selling, for instance. How do I make somebody understand what it is I'm selling to them and how do I make them interested in it? How do I tell its story? So that's kind of what copywriting does on a micro scale, but you're just expanding it to a macro. But I also think like this is maybe something I thought more about afterwards than at the time, because at the time it was very much we've got a job doing copywriting, and then we thought, okay, we could do more and all the rest of it, organic snowball and all the rest of that. But now I think about it, I think that strategy and literary interpretation have a lot in common. So I think, you know, when you're doing like academic criticism, you're basically often having an instinct about a text. You then find evidence to support that instinct that you have. You build an argument out of that, and then you draw insights from the kind of interpretation you've built and follow that through into different avenues. And I think strategy has a similar process of being, okay, I think this game would perform well with this audience. Let's find the evidence for that. Let's build it and then see how we turn that into something else. So I think there's a lot of crossovers. And also, we've never really distinguished between like art forms. Like for us, I'm like, I would quite happily analyze Last of Us or Portal as I would analyze Hamlet. Like I would quite happily put them.
In fact, actually, one of the earliest things we did when we came out of university, before we kind of moved into like Nerd Pirates proper, one of the earliest things we did, we
did a lot of things.
We did a lot of things. We just experimented for the first couple of months just to see what sticks. We wrote a few blogs. We did a few academic style blogs on pop culture items. So we did analysis of stuff like Dark Knight, stuff
Uncharted 4,
Uncharted
trailers that won.
And we just played around with those ideas. So I think games people said to us, but you studied literature. Like there's a kind of, I think, a snobbery that people sometimes feel where they say, oh, you know, as if we've taken some kind of step down from doing literature to games. Whereas I don't see it like that at all. I see it that games are pieces of art to be critiqued, communicated, understood, interpreted, reinterpreted. So yeah, we kind of felt there was a natural affinity with both PR marketing and then games and entertainment as art. And that's sometimes relevant, sometimes less so.
But yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, just recently on Final Fantasy and, you know, YouTube channel that we sort of do on the other side of my career, I actually analyzed a link between two characters. There's these two characters, Seymour and Yuna, and they both have very similar story arcs, but one is evil and one is good. And I was like flooded with like sort of stuff from it. Like just sort of once I got that little link, like I just could talk about it for ages with evidence and just things. I was just like, oh my God, this is so cool. But yeah, like I can do that with a game, but people just don't see that under the surface. Like they just see it's a game.
I completely agree that there's actually a lot of people that when they finish playing games have a similar experience to what you've just said. They kind of go, oh wow, there's so many ideas that I have that I want to discuss with people and I want to throw it around and take it really seriously. And I think that is another exciting thing about marketing and PR, is that it's an opportunity for you to take games and to kind of investigate them as creative properties and to say, how do they make you feel? You know, when you look at a game, what kind of audiences would be interested in it, or what surprising audiences might be interested in? Because sometimes,
and why do you care?
Yeah,
why do you care at all about that game? And if you have to actually answer that question to be able to market it, so it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so you guys have been working together very well for years now. What advice do you have for siblings or even just people on working as a team?
I think this one is basically about respecting your differences, which is ironic because we're twins. And so people normally assume there are none.
There's absolutely.
Yeah, I guess it's basically about saying your work process and my work process to work together don't have to be identical. They just have to be synergetic. I may have just made that word
Synergistic?
up. Synergistic. I may have just made it up. But yeah, I think it's really that simple, which is basically, you know, you might not always work the same way, but that doesn't mean they can't work together, and just be totally honest about the way you do things and make sure the other person understands that that's kind of non-negotiable. Obviously, there has to be some wiggle room of like, hey, we've got to work together here. But if you say, you know, I need to start with this, a really open idea with this, or someone else says, I want to start really with the details and the precise, like whatever they're saying, just say, okay, as long as we're on the same page about that,
you need to start and do it whatever way works for you.
In fact, maybe this is us, just us, because we love analysis and we're very highly analytical people. But actually, sometimes have a conversation like that, because a lot of people don't. They kind of go into work together and then they just work it out how their working relationship's going to function just as they go. Whereas we regularly sit down and say, hey, when we're working on this project, I feel like what would work best is if I know you like doing this bit, so could you do that? Or I feel in the mood for doing this. And we actually sometimes, it's not like programmatic for like next 6 months we plan out our working relationship, but we're not afraid to have a really like an hour to 2 hour long meeting that just talks about how the project's going to run between the two of us.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we'll change our mind and we'll discuss it. Like we're really interested in and open about talking about our working relationship.
I think also that we're very lucky because a lot of our all of our quirks, we work together because we've grown up together. So I can't really speak for people whose quirks don't match.
Yeah.
For us, it's very much like I've known her my whole life. I know how she works. It kind of just happens for us. Unfortunately, that's not great advice, but it kind of just happens.
No, but I think it can do that, because obviously like I work a lot with my husband, and
yes,
I mean, he's from England, I'm from America, so it's just kind of like, all right. But it is just that like weird sort of click. You can't explain it, but you just it's just peanut butter and jelly. It's just jam for you guys.
I love that. Exactly. We're peanut butter and jam. It just all happens and it's great.
Yeah, and you just like it. It's just good. Can't explain
also,
it.
Maybe another tip, the smallest tip I can just think of is that work out first if you actually like collaboration, because we love it. Yeah. But some people, that's not how they want to work, and that's also okay. Like if you find that you're the kind of person, and I know people like this, that just wants to be left alone to get on with it and then come back to report and discuss, that's not our style normally. But if that's you, then fine, go for it. Be clear about that, and then that will work for you as well. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Within limitations, everyone's got to be a bit collaborative, but see what works for you and try to make that work.
Absolutely. So do you feel as though working on virtual reality games has changed your approach on in marketing in general, or is it still a similar process throughout?
I think it's similar. I think in terms of from our perspective, a lot of it is just communicating about a product or a game, and I think that's very similar. I think the challenges or the differences, which is partly why obviously we work at an in-house team at a virtual reality marketing agency, so they're specifically specialist in virtual reality, because I think there are some differences that really you need sort of an expertise really is, you know, if you're showing a 360 environment and you're trying to translate that into a 2D like social media asset, like that can be really challenging. And you need to understand, like, you know, what's a good ways of doing that. And also, most people now who are getting VR games, like they know all about VR. They're kind of experts in their own right about their headsets and how they work, the rest of it. But a while back, it was also educating people, like, what the hell is this immersive experience? Like, what is it?
Yeah.
So that's kind of a different thing.
On top of that, also a big thing we've discussed and we've done a lot with Virtual Umbrella is that the showcasing those kinds of games in a demo space is also a very different experience, which, you know, I mean, sometimes with games it can be like this, but VR is a very immersive and very visceral experience. So if you're dealing with a very sensitive or difficult topic, showcasing that kind of thing requires an additional sensitivity. You really have to be prepared to give people context before they put the headset on, make sure they're comfortable, make sure they're safe as well, that they're not hitting one another or objects or things. Over. I mean, we have the Quest now, which makes things a bit easier when you're not tangled in wires all the time. But that requires, I think, a real specialist approach, and that you can't just be wholesale about that. You can't be like, oh, well, I've showed a game.
Just stick a headset on and let them run around. Don't do that. Also, I think the PR scene is totally different for VR. Well, like, which is actually really cool. Like, we have a whole media ecosystem that's basically very specialized in virtual reality. I mean, and augmented reality and the whole like extended reality scene. But yeah, I don't think that I think there are crossovers with games, but I think actually we're moving towards like a really specialist like media scene. So that's different. Like, if you're handling PR in the games world and you want to like promote a game in VR, like, you might not be talking to the same people very often.
Yeah, that's true too. And actually, it was quite surprising how many people from VR were at Women in Games. Well, maybe not surprising, but it was impressive because I have done like sort of reviews for games like for a long time, and I had never had the opportunity to use VR for some reason. So actually, somebody did have a Quest with them at Women in Games and let me try, and it is
brilliant.
It is just, I can't even explain it. I was in a room and I was just stuck in a room and I didn't know what to do, but I was happy to be in that room.
Oh, do you know what the content was?
No.
No. It's always the way. I was in a room and I just,
You know what, that experience you've just described is precisely the challenge of marketing PR when it comes to VR. People say, I had an experience and I can't put it in words how it feels. And that is I remember the amount of people who haven't tried VR before who say, oh, I'm not interested, I wouldn't want to buy it, and I wouldn't be, the headset's too expensive and the content's too expensive or something like that. And then you put a headset on them and the transformation is so quick.
Yeah.
That's something which can be a challenge, but also a boon as well, because sometimes you can be at an event and put a headset on someone and they're sold. You know, you're kind of done sometimes when they just say, I am moved by this. This is spectacular. I want this so much. So yeah, it's a challenge and an opportunity with VR that it can be such a unique and strange and moving thing to take part in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm really happy because I was talking to a journalist from The Guardian at Women in Games as well about it. And she said one of the experiences she had was the kitchen from Resident Evil 7. And I was just kind of like, thank goodness that wasn't my first VR experience, because I think I may have ran out of everything.
Yeah, I think people forget is like what you're looking at on a screen and what you're looking at in VR are very different. Like, I mean, I know that my threshold for scary on a screen and my threshold for scary in VR are very different. Like, I think, they're so different. Like, literally, there was just a guy walked up to me in VR, just like a model just walked up to me, and I was like, I'm so scared. He's really like tall, and whereas on a screen that would not have been scary at all.
I remember, this is a completely random story, but I was playing around with doing a tiny bit of VR development in Unity just for a bit of a laugh and to see if I could upskill. And I created a robot, just a small robot that I made to do certain animations. And I put Violet in the experience. And I made the robot do the little teapot dance. I'm a little teapot, short and stout, you know, that thing. And I thought, this is going to be adorable. But when she put the headset on, her immediate response was, this is uncanny, this is frightening, it's too close, he's too big, and he moves too quickly. So, I mean, that's the thing. We obviously, we're not developers. No, that must be a whole other challenge for developers also, that I think we have to be aware of as marketers, is that, I mean, they do their own testing and make sure they're not scaring everybody, but at the same time, it's an extra thing to think about. Yeah, it's an extra aspect, I guess, when you're selling a VR experience, to say, that's why I think on the Oculus Store they have a lot of like comfort ratings as well, and they talk about intensity, and I think that's a useful thing as a marketer too, to say this is a horror experience and it's going to be quite intense, is sometimes a metric you might want to stick on a VR piece that you might not mention so much or if it's a seated experience, maybe it's a more comfortable experience versus some that require you to kind of run around your living room. Those are little extra things that PR marketers have to bear in mind when you're marketing a VR piece. Just reminding people this could be very intense, or alternatively, this is chill. Don't lean on virtual walls. Don't.
No.
It doesn't work out well. That's what we have to tell people. Or desks. Yeah, desks. I mean, even I've used VR so much. I Expect You to Die and have a desk. I remember putting my Oculus Touch controllers on the desk and thinking that's now on the floor because there's no desk. So, it's easy to forget. The presence is really convincing.
It's almost like those dreams where you're like falling out of a chair and then all of a sudden like you wake up and you're just like, wait, I'm laying down. Like I've not fallen.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh. It's a whole different process. But I guess it's like gaming literacy. You get used to VR literacy if you use it enough, but it takes a bit of time.
Yeah, I mean, it will be interesting to see the future of VR and how, like, I want to sort of compare it to the Wii. I know it's not the same as the Wii, but it's almost like how the Wii took off among families. Like, it's seeing whether or not VR can have that same sort of success and appeal towards families for future. And I mean, one of the biggest discussions that we had at Women in Games that absolutely blew my mind is the cultural aspect as far as people with disabilities Like how impressive that probably is for the future for people who can't necessarily maybe even hold a controller. They can just experience it sitting down or in their beds.
Yeah, VR, the possibilities for VR, AR, and the kind of the XR scene are really exciting. I think that
I think also people talk a lot about the consumer side of it, but also, of course, the business applications and the more corporate applications, I think are absolutely, again, endless. I think people are finding more and more ways to use it for like training people and safe ways of doing maybe scientific experiments that are cheaper and more accessible, or even sometimes opening up talent pools for more diverse people, or people from different places, or people who require remote working or more flexible hours, maybe parents, people like that, by having, you know, remote working VR meeting rooms. It's a big discussion about, you know, maybe someone doesn't need to be in the office if they can be present virtually. These are the kinds of conversations that I think are going to keep happening and are really exciting, and I hope will kind of open up the future even more. Are you waiting for your next VR meeting with a client? I am. That would be great. I'm looking forward to it.
And that you can set your avatar as well. You can like give yourself like a pointy hat or something.
That's exactly a pointy hat. You know us already.
Yeah.
Definitely. Pointy hat, broomstick. That's the next.
As close to a witch as I can look in VR sounds great. I would go for that.
Yeah, I want to be a white mage. I want to be like a little Lalafell just sitting in a meeting. Hi.
It'd be fun, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
You give a bit of personality to a meeting. You turn up like that. That'd be great.
All right. Well, that's it from me. But thank you guys so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Yeah,
it's been awesome. It's been a delight.
That's it for this episode of She Plays Games. Thank you so much again to Nerd Pirates for coming on the show. And if you want more from Lily and Violet, you can follow them on Twitter at Nerd Pirates. Also, if you want more episodes of She Plays Games, please be sure to subscribe and follow me on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube by searching She Plays Games, and on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at ShePlaysPodcast. Our next episode will be on Monday, October 28th, and if you want to be on the show or want to nominate someone to come on the show, you can email me at ShePlaysPodcast@gmail.com. See you all again next time on She Plays Games.